Unresolved Mysteries. Where if last Snapchat sent before vanishing at sea, Austin and Perry. On July 24, 2015, 14-year-olds, Austin Stefanos and Perry Cohen from Jupiter, Florida, decide to take Austin's 19-foot boat out fishing. The boat was registered to Austin's mom. Austin and Perry were best buds and experienced boaters. Their parents also enjoyed spending time together. You might think it sounds crazy to let two 14-year-olds go boating on their own, but they were both licensed boaters. However, they were not allowed to go more than a couple of miles offshore. Timeline. Some URL. Friday, July 24, M 2014. At 11:25 a.m. Austin checks in with his mom via text message. Perry's phone was broken. At 1:30 p.m., the boys are seen buying $110 of gas at Jib Marina. Just after 2 p.m., a security camera. Some URL possibly captures the boys as they are leaving out of the Jupiter inlet. At some point, the boys sent Snapchats to friends of ominous storm clouds with the caption "We're effed." A severe thunderstorm rolled through the area shortly after the boys left the inlet. However, I found conflicting reports on the exact time of the storm. 4:00 p.m. Austin Stefanos' grandmother notices that they are not back, and he is not answering his phone. Perry Cohen's family is also notified and 911 is called. At 4:23 p.m. Nick Korniloff speaks with 911 operators. He tells the operator that the boys left the Jupiter inlet, which they did not have permission to do. The Coast Guard searches for the boat/boys. Sunday, July 26, 2015. Austin's boat was spotted. Some URL by the Coast Guard 65 miles offshore. The engine cover, life jackets, and a Yeti cooler were missing. The boat was not recovered and was later lost at sea. A pilot volunteering in the search believes he saw one of the two teens floating. Some URL on debris. Friday, July 31st. The Coast Guard has announced. Some URL, the official search and rescue will be called off at sunset tonight. At this point more than 50,000 square nautical miles have been searched to no avail. The boys' parents continued their search for weeks with private groups and volunteers. It was believed that the boys were still alive. Some URL, because they had extensive knowledge of the sea, or as my grandpa would say, they were salty dogs. There were several theories thrown around that the boys used the engine cover, life jackets, and Yeti cooler to survive. I couldn't find any reports on this, but I do remember in the early days of the search a psychic was hired and kept stating the boys were on an island. I don't believe in that stuff, but I always found it interesting. In March 2016, a Norwegian ship spotted Austin's capsized boat 170 miles off of the east coast of Bermuda. A month later, the Coast Guard retrieved the boat. Some URL, and Austin's phone. Some URL. After more than a year-long investigation, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has determined that Austin Stefanos and Perry Cohen had a weather-related incident. Some URL at sea which caused their vessel to capsize. Bahamas theory. It was found that on July 23, 2015, one day before the boys went missing, Perry has sent an Instagram message. Some URL to a friend stating me and Austin are crossing to the Bahamas tomorrow. Come with us, we wouldn't check in. Austin also sent a Snapchat. Some URL on the day the boys left on the boat showed a picture of fishing poles on a boat and a message saying, "Peace out Jupe." A friend of the boys later revealed to investigators that usually when we all say "Peace out Jupe," we mean going to the Bahamas. Additionally, Austin secured $100 in gas money for the trip and Perry had asked his stepfather to borrow his GPS the night before. Austin's grandfather's comment. Some URL on the Bahamas theory, he knows you need a passport, he didn't have any money, and he knows 2 engines to go, minimum, for 2 boats, never by yourself with 1 engine and 1 battery. The 1 battery, he wouldn't think about, but 1 engine, he would, and 40 gallons of gas, no. Foul play theory. Austin's stepfather believes the boys were abducted. Some URL. Photographs taken of the recovered boat show the ignition switch and the battery, both of which were in hard-to-access parts of the boat, in the off position. So the boat was disabled intentionally. Austin's phone had also been properly powered off versus dying/losing power in the water. Lawsuits. In the beginning, optimism was high and the boys' parents leaned on each other. Once it became real that the boys weren't coming home, the families turned on each other. Perry's family sued Austin's for child neglect and wrongful death. Claims against Austin's mother. She allowed the boys to go out on the ocean aboard a boat that was unseaworthy because it lacked a radio that would be helpful in a storm. The mom violated Cohen's orders that Perry wasn't allowed to go offshore without an adult and without her permission. The mom failed to watch over and supervise children too young to exercise judgment to care for themselves and protect them from foreseeable hazards and harm. Claims against Austin's father. He impeded the search for the boys by failing to call 911 or Perry's parents as soon as Black texted and called Stefanos to say the boys were missing. I could not find a timeline of this event. The father then made matters worse by deciding to conduct his own search first, and then not telling authorities where he had already looked. As of today, the boat, life jackets, Yeti cooler, engine cover, cell phone, and tackle boxes have been found. However, the boys' bodies have not. Whether? Pirates? Bermuda Triangle? Inexperienced fishermen? What do you think? Wherever they are, I hope they are in peace. And #X200B. Edit, Flair. It was pointed out that this isn't an unresolved disappearance. Caught by storm. No way out to flee. Turned of everything to conserve battery and fuel for after the storm has passed. Tried to weather the storm under the boat cover. Got thrown from the boat by the storm. I think there is very little doubt that they got swept into the sea, but we will never be sure. That's my theory at least. I follow this investigation pretty closely, but it's been a while since I've thought about it. I'm confident that it was inexperience and they died what was likely a horrible death. It's easy to suggest they were abducted, but it's a lot easier to believe they drowned/died of hypothermia. I also don't think the pilot saw two boys floating. If he did, then relocating them shouldn't have been impossible. I grew up in that area and I remember reading about this story. Beach towns have their own culture and it's not unusual at all for kids their age to go out on the water alone, though I do think it is a bad idea. Breaks my heart. They probably just got swept overboard or something tbh. The sea is unpredictable and accidents happen. The sea is very unforgiving, especially in a small boat with minimal provisions and no radio to call for help. If you go over the side, and have to tread water, you can quickly tire, to the point that you can't climb back in. That's in flat calm water. Do it during a storm, nearly impossible. The U.S. Coast Guard sees these cases all the time, and called off the search 5 days later because they knew the odds of the boys being found was nil. They either drowned in that ocean, someone followed them out to sea, overpowered them and abducted them, or aliens did it. Occam says they died in the ocean, like many others before them, unfortunately. I would never go out in the open water on a boat like that without 2 working radios, signaling devices, day and night, whistle, 2 days food/water, and most importantly, a float plan filed with family/friends/marina so the CG knows where to look for me if I don't come back that night. These poor boys did none of that, and they succumbed to the sea. This case breaks my heart. I remember following it back when they were first reported missing. I always believed and still do that they succumbed to the ocean. They may have been experienced for their age and all, but much older folks with many more years of experience have died at sea under even less harsh conditions. It's just so sad. They must have been so scared. I think Occam's razor would say they had engine trouble on the way across, got caught up in a storm, and the boat was swamped or overturned by a large wave. I think it's natural to assume they were wearing life jackets when they went overboard simply because the life jackets were not in the boat, but I think anyone who has ever been a 14-year-old boy free of adult supervision will realize that's not a sound assumption. Abduction is not a minor undertaking and requires a motive. With no ransom demand, no history of kidnapping in the area, and no particular market for 14-year-old boys, the world seems to have something of a surplus. I think that's unlikely. Even if they'd stumbled on something and seen something they shouldn't have seen far from shore, they would have simply been killed, which for all practical purposes would be the same result as drowning. This one hits close to home. I live in Jupiter. Everyone was so sad for these boys when this happened. Greater than I couldn't find any reports on this, but I do remember in the early days of the search a psychic was hired and kept stating the boys were on an island. I don't believe in that stuff, but I always found it interesting. Ugh. These kids were overcome by the storm. It got really ugly between the parents in the aftermath of the tragedy. Thankfully that has stopped. I mean, the simplest solution is that high wind and waves in the storm simply knock them and their gear overboard. I don't see any reason to suspect any foul play. I call BS on experienced boaters. They were only 14 years old. They may know how to steer a boat, but pretty much everything else about what they did screams inexperienced boaters. They drowned. 99.9%. This is why it is important to have a marine radio with extra batteries when you go out to sea. The cooler would work as a floating device, wouldn't it? What about the engine cover? Would that float? Sounds to me like they decided to abandon the boat at some point. Greater than 14-year-olds. Greater than experienced boaters. Those two statements are incongruous. Adults who have spent decades making a living on the ocean still occasionally are lost at sea during storms. Two 14-year-olds would not have the experience necessary to handle an emergency. Question about the volunteer pilot: did authorities follow up on the piece of debris he thought he saw one of the boys on? Sad case, but not unresolved. Unaccepted maybe, but definitely not unresolved. Not being much of a deep water person, life jackets are basically designed to stay on no matter what, right? What are the odds of the life jackets being found without the boys if they were wearing them? I'm local. Those boys drowned. End of story. Heartbreaking, but it's really the only logical situation. The first rule of the sea is: the sea rules. I'm from Jupiter as well. Since I was 11, I've had a boating license. I was able to use, and responsible for a small boat. Many times when the ocean was flat, I was tempted to ride out and try to cross to the Bahamas, but I never did. I knew how dangerous it could be or how quickly the weather can change. I've done plenty of crossings with groups and very experienced boaters, and even then I've had close calls. You can have all the experience and the ocean will still surprise you. It's a terrible tragedy. A storm at sea is no joke. I assume one went overboard, and the other tried to save him, resulting in both of their demise. My first instinct when in a dangerous situation is to preserve as much battery life and fuel as possible. For instance, we were stuck in the Muir National Forest during a snowstorm, and my first step was to power off my phone. My phone has the GPS maps downloaded, and that was most important. My theory is one died trying to save the other. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine what was going through their heads. Laying in bed every night knowing your kid is out there in the middle of the ocean. Been sailing all my life. Even got a 21 boat instead of a car in high school. After my senior year, a friend and I tried to head from Boca Ciega Bay to the Keys. Right after entering Captive Pass, we got hit by a really bad storm. Here are reports that sustained winds hit 60 miles per hour. We always had the radio on and could hear people calling for sea tow and even one for Coast Guard assistance. I truly believe if we hadn't made it into the pass by the time the winds hit, we could have ended up like them. Even then, we dragged a 25-pound anchor some 20 to 30 feet out of the channel and ended up in about 20 of water, with the dagger board still down. All that being said, these boys had a plan, the weather had another. Sadly, they are not living life on some tropical island. Given the circumstances of the case and the fact that neither of their bodies have ever been found, I presume that both of them got lost at sea and drowned. I'm confused. The narrative says the boat was spotted a few days after the incident and then spotted again the next year. Why wasn't the boat searched/recovered after it was found the first time? Disappointed face. Sadly, they probably encountered a bad storm or were completely lost and died from starvation, dehydration, or possibly drowned accidentally if the boat capsized, sank, or was filled with water. Greater than a psychic was hired. Really shows how hopeless the parents were. Fuck these people who are willing to abuse their desperation for cash. I'm from Jupiter and this story enveloped the whole town. It's so common for kids to be in the water on their small boats fishing and exploring. I think a lot of people here forget the risks of living on the water and how quickly things can change. I pray both those families find peace. I couldn't imagine what they had to and still go through. Dumb question: how is the phone, and other personal effects, found so much later if the boat is capsized? This one has me scratching my head. Some URL. It's not like the boat had an enclosed cabin, right? Or did it? The shittiest part about this is the Coast Guard spotted their boat and potentially one of the teens they're still alive, and they either weren't able to go down and get them or just decided not to. Must have been horrible for those dying kids to see the planes flying overhead and then realize they weren't coming for them. 100% dead from the storm. Wasn't there a huge fight over the phone and unlocking its contents as well? Bad weather, case closed. And I believe they were going to Bahamas. Lost at sea for sure. I grew up on the water and could pilot a boat alone by 12 and was probably about these boys' level at 14 too. There's nothing you can do about the storms, and they may not have had the experience to know how to at least lessening the risk of capsizing instead of just turning off your engine, which you never want to do. And #X200B. I do feel bad for both sets of parents, but I do understand that the parents would want to at least look at the normal spots before calling authorities. A lot of bad decisions all around, and they died in a storm. Greater than Austin's boat was spotted by the Coast Guard 65 miles offshore. The engine cover, life jackets, and a Yeti cooler were missing. The boat was not recovered and was later lost at sea. Sounds like a lot of possibilities, but I'm just hung up on this. What does that mean? They found stuff missing when the boat was later recovered, after, being thrashed around in storms with no one controlling it? Just a weird piece to throw in there that seems to add drama when there seems to be enough there anyways. I can't believe my eyes. I was just thinking of these two a few days ago. How fast could a boat like that travel? Looks like the Bahamas is 113 kilometers away, so it would take many hours to get there, right? Why was the boat not recovered by the Coast Guard and just left there? Psychics are a joke. I was in Saran on a search several years back. A psychic had latched, only word for these leeches, onto the family and had them convinced that he had a vision of the lost person on a high place. We kept to the regular search patterns while the poor family were off climbing every hill around. We eventually found the person, sadly deceased and at the bottom of a well. I was 14 once. No way should the parents have let them go out to open sea at that age. This isn't a mystery at all. They got themselves killed out at CBC. They didn't know what they were doing at that level. They weren't prepared, trained, or experienced enough to handle being that far out and with a damn storm and just two of them. The families are just doing what families do best in situations like these. Cling on to hope that there might be some positive outcome to this, and then proceed to deny the truth that's hard to bear, which is that your family members are dead and it was their own damn fault and no one else to blame for it except for them. Sorry to the families, but this is the harsh truth that must be repeated to them since they obviously aren't willing to accept it and move on right now. I've been following the story of the two firefighters who left Cape Canaveral and disappeared August 16 this year. A lot of people compare and contrast what happened to Austin and Perry. I live in Jupiter. This was such a sad time for the town, experienced 14-year-olds. This is actually the first I have heard of this case, so I thank you for this awesome write-up. I was just curious, was the stuff that was found in the same area? Like the phone, boat, etc.? U/Walex22 Would you mind if I share your timeline on my Tumblr? I will directly link to this page. This happened so close to home for me it's hard to believe it's been 4 years. I hope they're happy in the Bahamas and not abducted or something worse. Maybe not 10 million % solved, but I'm pretty sure they died in an ocean storm. I think it was just a really tragic storm accident. I live by the ocean and even experienced fishermen die all the time. The ocean is big and scary and you take a risk going out there. It isn't a large boat, but it isn't small. They must have made mistakes and gone further offshore than agreed. If they were 2 miles out, I imagine they could have seen the storm and headed west to shore in a matter of minutes. If they cruised at 12 miles per hour, that's a 10-minute run. They could probably run the boat at twice that speed. My guess is that they anticipated clear weather and made a run out to a shoal or reef much further out, then got stuck in a storm. Hey, this took place in my town and knew these little guys' families. Such a damn shame. Skeptical. Holy cow, look how tiny the little boat they went out on is. Some URL. I read the other articles and saw the wreckage, but I was imagining a giant yacht. Why would they go out 800 kilometers to sea in that? I wouldn't be able to make it in the ocean. I panic a little bit when I fall of my ship in Sea of Thieves when it's going full speed. Pirates of the Bermuda Triangle. Which is just Captain Hook. I'm an optimist. This makes me so sad. I remember reading about this back when I was their age. I'm not sure if I could sue Austin's parents if I were involved, but I can see why Perry's parents wouldn't. It's all just so sad. I can't believe this was that long ago. I do believe they were lost at sea with no foul play involved. If it was pointed out this wasn't an unresolved one, how was it resolved? Definitely a lesson to be learned, you'd hope. Great write-up. I had forgotten about this story. Here is the thing: in the Bahamas and neighboring islands there is a large quantity of feral pigs, that in turn have brought in a lot of sharks. I think they got overturned due to the weather, and eventually got eaten by sharks. I hate to say it sounds gruesome, but sharks are ferocious eaters. They will eat anything, and the kids were easy prey. Would have been nuts if it were a rogue wave. They drowned and their bodies are probably somewhere in an island, inside a sea critters, or deep in the ocean, or all of the above. It seems like their intentions were to go to the Bahamas or somewhere more than a couple miles, but seems like they got in a bad situation and perished at sea. I definitely don't believe they were kidnapped, or at least, I don't see any evidence they were. I know if I'm in a situation that I feel a little iffy in, like a long drive, and my phone battery gets low, I power it off so I can turn it back on and use it if needed, but it also seems like they powered it off so it couldn't be tracked. I find it so sad that two families are grieving with no answers, and instead of helping each other cope, they're suing and bitching. Shows people's true character. How close was the Bermuda Triangle? Is it really unresolved though? What are the chances of recovering bodies at open sea? Those boys were fish food.